beard the same as the other two?
Yeah, it's
yeah. I was thinking that I was going to shave, and then I thought, you know what? No, I'm not.
He's waiting for the sponsorship from the Dollar Razor Club.
Yeah.
Oh yes, there's loads of YouTubers
Harry's
doing that. Good
razors are
afternoon.
the ones I always see
Good
advertised.
morning. Good evening, wherever you might be in the world. Straight in at 13. That's usually arrived at 13. Welcome, wherever you are in the world. This is quite a big topic. Big trouble in Dorivans. It's big trouble. It's not me. It's not, just for once, it's not me. And it's not Ian. And it's not Mark either. And Bruce can't possibly have the finger pointed at him because he's not in the UK. Maybe it's the other Ian who's not with us. Maybe that's why he had to flee to France. But who knows? Yeah, Richard Ryan, our friendly barrister. Man, you need to go if you're into drone. Let's start with that. If you're in trouble in the UK around drones, you need to call Richard. Do not pass go. Do not collect £200. Just call Richard. It's as simple as that. So that aside, Richard called me last week and said there was quite an interesting case, which obviously I hadn't heard about. I'm not sure if case is the right word, but he's been working with it. And it was in court last week, and I've already said enough irrelevant nonsense. Richard, could you lead us by the hand? Where are we at? What's happening?
Yeah. Okay. Great to see you all, and welcome to Drone Stuff. So last week was the culmination of about 6 months worth of court work to get to a trial in the criminal courts in England, whereby a local council was prosecuting a drone pilot under a breach of a community protection notice. So I've got some slides that I can share and walk you through all of this in a minute. And the consequence was that the judges preferred the evidence of the prosecution, which was a local council, and convicted the drone pilot. And subsequently, he got fined, and they also asked for forfeiture of all of his drone kit and his drone and everything else. And he was using an M300 in this particular circumstance, so not a cheap piece of equipment. So there are rights of appeal, and we're going to look at that and talk about that with respect to the way that we could approach this without giving too much away, because we're not there yet. But ultimately, we managed to argue a serious reduction in his fine, but also to keep his drone equipment, which was the silver cloud, really, in this silver cloud of lining, really, in terms of the storm that's now upon us. Because, and the reason why this is really important, because if drone pilots are being slapped with what's known as a community protection warning notice first and do nothing about it, and then are served a community protection notice and do nothing about it, the horse is already bolted. It's really hard then to argue against the prosecution, which is a local council, to put that away.
Can you just explain what? Can you just maybe your slides do that? But what exactly does that mean? So I'm flying somewhere. Why? What is it I'm being served? Why am I being served it? How much evidence do I need to be served this thing? Can someone some council official walk up to me and do this?
Can I just jump in to just add on to to Gary's question as well, so you can cover it in two. Am I right to think that if this thing if you had this community protection thing put against you, that if you didn't adhere to it, in the worst case scenario, that's prison?
No, there's no prison sentence under this, Ian.
Okay.
It's a fine, a level 4 fine, which is around £2,500, I think, is the max on this. But then, of course, the prosecution put all their costs on top, and then there's a victim surcharge on top of that as well. So it can be quite considerable. If you are a company, the fine can be up to £10,000. So if you trade as a drone company, it's a potentially a different proposition. So I put some slides up and.
Yeah, and well, can we just answer Daniel's question before what's the background on the flight, or maybe the slides do that?
No, they don't. I didn't really go into specifics on the flight, just really the law. But the background is simply taking off and taking off from. At the time, it was unknown that it was council land, which was a car park. And interestingly, in this situation, the council put in a drone policy which said you cannot take off or land from council land or council owned or managed land and or above their land. So now we're breaching into airspace. And when I argued this initially before the judges said, oh, this is way above my pay scale, because we're now talking about a slight crossover of aviation law. But in this particular case, it wasn't a real crossover of aviation law, simply because we're talking about breach of a notice as opposed to pre-notice. I'll come on to that now. Let me share my screen, and then we can.
Yeah, if you just hit share down at the bottom, or present, and then I'll have to add it to the screen. Here we go.
There we go. Can you see that? Can you see that?
Yeah, fine.
Great. Okay. So this is I think one part of what's known as antisocial behaviour law will be community protection notice. There's also community protection notice with respect to public places as well. So there's quite a number of antisocial behaviour laws that local councils can use. And it is really all about antisocial behaviour. This is where the councils are now starting to come in. And the reason why this is really important now is because this particular council has been successful. It won't take long for other councils now to jump on this bandwagon and start slapping community protection warning notices all over the place, which are then followed by community protection notices. And this is all introduced under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. So who can issue these notices? So there are two main protagonists, really, a police constable and the local authority, which is what happened in this case. And there you can see they're defined as the district council, a county council, or a London Borough Council. And unfortunately, it does include the Council of the Isles of Scilly if you're flying down there. And pretty much local authorities do take the lead in CPNs, community protection notices. So forgive all the words on this, but I've highlighted the three key aspects of the legal tests for establishing whether a community protection notice should be imposed. And this, to your point, Gary, an authorised person just has to be satisfied on reasonable grounds that there's a detrimental effect, it's persistent or continuing, and is unreasonable. So you're asking Mr. Local Council Officer, who's usually the antisocial behaviour officer, dealing with teenagers, making lots of noise and disruption in car parks or graffiti or rubbish that's been lying around for months on end, to come to a conclusion that, this drone flying near a residential area, so this took off from a car park, which was near a park, flying over there, hovering, carrying out some filming work for about 5 minutes, then back down again about 5 or 6 times a day in the same location.
Can I just ask a thing at this point?
Yeah.
I mean, from a commercial drone ops viewpoint, you wouldn't normally be flying from land that you didn't have permission from in the first place. So in that viewpoint, there wouldn't be much sympathy for the car park scenario. But can this, because you've mentioned that they've discussed overflighting this, is there a worry with what's gone on here that you could actually be on land where you have permission to fly from, but then you're going across council land and they could use the same powers, because that's where the real fear would be.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they're going to try and do. I think that, what they try and do here is make the policy as broad as possible. So flying to and from or above is the wording that's been used in this particular policy. But of course, nobody owns the airspace. It's a national asset. And so how can they restrict somebody from doing that?
Also, so where this gets really, I think, going to be confusing, because obviously the CAA state you can apply for a geozone if they accept it or not. So there is a process in place already for all this. So it's going to be really interesting. And then if the councils do get control of the airspace, that's all drone delivery problems that might come eventually, that become a problem for them. Then there's all, how's it going to be, how are we going to know where we can and cannot fly? Because they're going to have to somehow get all that updated, all those kind of air maps, all that's got to be updated. And then there's got to be surely a system where we can be able to do jobs and work commercially. And this is quite scary. This could do a lot of damage.
So, I mean, it is. And as everybody knows on the call, Cap 722 says that you must comply with local laws and regulations, right? Whatever they may be. So you've got bylaws in place. Usually, should be the right method in my mind for prohibiting an act, because a bylaw is there as a proper method by which a restriction can be put in place by local council, because it has to go out to public consultation and should be reflective of, all users of that area of land. Whereas here, all we're saying is that an authorised person, which is your council officer, just has to be satisfied on reasonable grounds. So in this particular case, there were a number of complaints from different residents. One of them was an ex-police officer. Those complaints are logged by the council to say, I'm annoyed by all of this. Can you do something about it, council officer? And in this particular case, there were only 2 flights recorded during the breach of the CPN.
Whoa.
And they thought that was, was compliant really with the CPN. I couldn't unpick these grounds for a CPN here, because we'd passed that stage. The CPN had been issued. So this is a really careful point to make. You can't, once a CPN's been issued, I'm now arguing about whether or not there's a breach, and I'll come on to the defences in a minute. But if this is pre-CPN, we can argue that these do not apply in order to stop the CPN being put in place.
So just help me here, Richard. There was a 21-day evening, Mac. There was a 21-day process somewhere in here. There was 21 days where you could have done more about it.
Yeah, that's right. And we have an appeal process for these, which is a 21-day limit, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And if you fall outside of that, now you're in breach territory, and it's a case of arguing how this doesn't apply because you use the statutory defences available to you, which we try to do in this case. But as I said, the prosecution, their evidence was preferred by the judges. So it's got to have a detrimental effect on those in the locality. Interestingly, the guidance on this, which is published by the Home Office for police officers, which is published on this by officers, published by the Home Office for police officers, says that it must be more than annoying. It's genuinely got to have a detrimental effect on their life or in their locality. So trying to, we know the temporary nature of drones: goes up, can only fly for 20 minutes, must come down again, stops, however long, back up, back down. And then you've got weather issues, you've got, rain, wind. So it's not, I think it's very difficult to argue that it is a persistent or continuing nature. And all these 3 legal tests, detrimental effect, persistent or continuing nature, and unreasonable, must be fulfilled in order for a CPN to be issued. Okay, so I won't go into all the wording here because it's quite wordy, but the next slide. So before they issue a CPN, they've got to give you a written warning. And this has got to outline the behavior that's being complained of, outline why it's got a detrimental effect or the detrimental effect, and state when the behavior must have changed by, and a reasonable time for compliance should be given. And think about it, here it's got the example of waste being removed. So there's, 20 bags of rubbish in somebody's garden, which is causing some kind of nuisance. You've got to give them more than an hour to move it, basically. And this is where this is going here. And it's got to let you know what the consequences of a CPN are, especially if they're breached. And it's got to contain the date of issue and name of the authority. So that's all stated in law. And when you get issued a warning notice, it should have all of that information on it. If it doesn't, then it's a defective warning notice. So we can then argue that one away. So breaching. So this is where we were last week in court. We'd breached it because the person had been issued with CPN had failed to comply with it because they carried out 2 flights. And that was evidenced by the prosecution witness.
Slow down for me a bit here. 2 flights on 2 separate occasions, or one
Correct.
flight, then one flight, then the warning, then another flight?
No, so we had the warning, then we had
Right,
the CPN issued because we carried on flying,
right.
and then once the CPN had been issued, we had 2 more flights.
Oh, okay.
So now we're in
Right,
breach
okay.
of the CPN
Right,
because the CPN was there to say the only way you can fly is if you apply to the council for permission, and we need 5 pieces of evidence in order to give you permission, which we may refuse, and our legal officer at the council, their finding is final and binding. So the council saying, if I don't approve of your paperwork, which is everything we give to the CAA, and they want to see it, and also, interesting in this policy, there was no distinction between recreational or commercial user. They said recreational and commercial users must provide the following: all of that paperwork, including indemnity insurance, up to the value, I think it was 5 million. So why would a recreational user have all of that? They simply wouldn't. They'll just have, their registration, the CAA registration, and their ID. But there was no distinction on the policy. So lots of issues around the policy. The other thing that was wrong with the policy, they had a paragraph at the bottom, legislation. You must comply with Articles 241 and Articles 94 and 95, which, as we know, due to the Air Navigation Order Amendment 2020 regulations, 94 and 95 were kicked out. But this policy was dated 2018, so it itself was out of date. And this every time I offered this as an argument, the judges said that this wasn't relevant, which technically it wasn't relevant to the breach, but it was relevant to the defence, and that they didn't like. So, as you can see here, where a person is prosecuted, they'll be guilty of an offence, liable to summary conviction. Level 4 is 2.5k. Oh, sorry, I said 10 grand. It's 20 for a body, which is a corporate entity. And this is a defence here. However, a person will not have committed an offence if they took all reasonable steps to comply with the CPN, or there was some other reasonable excuse for the failure to comply with it. So what we said here was, in the CPN itself, it said you can't take off or land from the park. We said we didn't. We took off and landed from the car park, which was adjacent to the park, and that was not identified on the map. And the car park, until a year or so ago, was pay and display, and then it became clear that that was council owned or managed land. These flights took place before that time, so it was unknown what the ownership status of the car park was. So that's why we took all reasonable steps to comply with it, if indeed we were, which was to say we're not flying over or taking off from the park, we're flying from the car park. They didn't accept that. So then I came up with, well, there are other reasonable excuses for the failure to comply with it, because reasonable excuse or reasonable step a term of art? I don't know. I don't know what they mean by reasonable step. Or maybe that'll come out in what I'm about to explain. So, in the policy document, so the CPN said you must comply with the policy document. It was dated and referenced, and in that document, it had no distinction between recreational or commercial user. It listed all of the documents that they must supply. The legislation was out of date on it, and there were a couple of other pieces around the wording which weren't incredibly clear. So my argument to the court was, well, it's reasonable for a drone pilot who's got a PFCO, who's got their insurances, carries out risk assessments, does the flight that they should be doing. When they look at this policy, because it's tied to the notice, can't comply with it because it's against everything they've been taught on their course. And so how can they comply with legislation that's out of date? So there's a reason there for failure to comply. It's reasonable to expect a drone pilot not to be able to comply with the notice because the notice itself is unclear. And the argument that keeps saying, well, you can't appeal the notice because we're out of time. And I said, I'm not appealing the notice. They said, well, you're using the argument as if you were appealing it. I said, well, the point is you could use both arguments for appeal and a defense because they're one of the same thing. And that's the reasonable excuse bit. Of course, as you now know, the court wasn't persuaded by that either. So we really were in difficult territory here because the other point to it is the court didn't understand the aviation aspects within the council's policy as well. So it was a real trying to educate them was very difficult. So seizure, so pre-conviction, so pre-CPN, they do have the power to seize your items. So when you get a warning notice, you must be very careful here because there is the potential power to take the equipment. What we were more concerned about with in this particular case was post-conviction because once the conviction had taken place, the council had already submitted a draft forfeiture order. So they were absolutely keen and they wanted the drone equipment to be disposed of or destroyed. So that's what they were asking for. We managed to argue that that was an excessive and onerous power on top of what a CPN provides, because a CPN itself is a strong power that the magistrates have in their pocket because it can restrict somebody's behavior. It can confine somebody's behavior, so it's directly impacting upon that person. So to argue that they wanted that as well, and potentially take away somebody's ability to earn a livelihood, I argued was excessive and onerous. And luckily for us, the judges agreed with that part of the mitigation. But
so what do you think prompted the? Sorry, Richard, but what do you think prompted the council to be quite that vindictive? Will they always? So I've got an ice cream van, and I've pulled up on the some bit of council land, and I'm selling me ice creams, and they don't like it. Would they serve this sort of thing on me and take my ice cream van away as a sort of matter of fact? That's what I'm trying. Is taking someone's livelihood away a matter of fact thing to them?
I don't know if it's a matter of fact thing, Gary, but they were all chips in on this. You know, they'd spent quite a lot of money on their legal work, and they were going, you know, all in. They cashed their chips in on this, and so if it was to make an example, as far as I'm aware, this is the first case in the country of somebody being prosecuted for breach of the CPN that relates to drones.
I think are we sorry, Ian, after you.
You go first, Gary.
So are we at liberty to say what sort of flight this person was undertaking?
Yeah. I mean, it was a legitimate flight, filming horse racing.
Filming a horse race. Would they have gone after somebody so hard where I'm trying fishing, and you're probably not going to say this because you're a barrister, but it to me it's like it's almost is the jockey. Why are they pulling the string so hard? This is a bit bigger than just a standard old flight, I think.
Yeah, but if you can compare it to somebody another drone pilot that actually does media coverage, it's the same sort of thing, or sports events. It doesn't really matter what they were doing with respect to the subject nature of it. We all use cameras in some way, shape, or form of recording an activity or an event, whether it's sports or something else. And so, it applies broadly, I think, Gary, to your point. I don't think it was necessarily the fact that they are specifically doing that. I mean, the police on a number of occasions also turned up during this period, and the local constabulary's drone police turned up and did not issue a CPN, didn't know that the council had a CPN structure in place, and didn't in any way prosecute the drone pilots because they were acting legitimately. They showed all of the documentation that they had and were above board. And so there was no action taken by the police here. So even the court knowing that still.
So you told the court that, did you? How did the court know that?
Because that came out in evidence when I cross-examined the council's officers.
Can I ask a question at this stage? Which council is this?
This is Oadby Council.
Where's
where
that?
Where in the country is this? Because I don't know.
I don't know where that is.
In Leicestershire.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, and Leicestershire's anti-drone, because they have kind of a blanket policy of no drones, don't they? So maybe that's a little bit behind it. I don't know.
Oadby and Whitney, I think it is, or Whitby, something like that. But it's Oadby is the main part of the council.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because with the council, obviously, as you mentioned, they put a lot of money behind this for the legals. I'm just trying to work out the real motivation with all the issues that councils have. I still feel what Gary was really getting at is, as somebody with some influence been pulling some strings at the council, to a councillor giving a bit of a nudge saying, I want something done about this.
Yeah, Ian, that may be the case, but it also could be the precursor to earning fees out of it, because you've got to submit your paperwork. I've had this up here in Scotland in Stirling. I went to go and film the Stirling Monument. They said, this is no drone zone. I said, why? They said, well, you've got to get permission. I said, who from? They said, the council. So I got their form, and it's 250 quid to submit your application. I said, well, why would I pay that? I can go take off from public land down the road and fly around the Stirling Monument, and you can't stop me. Oh, on this occasion, Mr. Ryan, we won't claim the fee from you. And it's, and suddenly it's a money spinner, because it's a bolt on to, big A-list blockbuster film companies coming along where they charge a fortune, and on the back of the application they bolt on the drone piece, and that's how they do it.
I mean, what you mentioned earlier is the use case that concerns me most, from media freedom, but also, there are a lot of companies now that, small, your freelance video guys that, their living is doing the news, and if they're using drones like they are at the moment, and often the police aren't particularly keen on it, just because they just see it as a nuisance. And again, they don't always know which is just a hobbyist putting the drone up and which is the regular press report. But it invites now to say, well, we'll put one of these orders against you. And you could do that for an entire city, because all you have to do is, you see the pilot out once, he's taken off from the street, or anywhere that isn't private land, and you can then put the notice on him, and then if ever again he's taken off from anywhere that isn't private land.
That's what this council's done, Ian, because they've included not only the name of the park, but any council-owned or managed land.
Yeah, so you're covering vast spaces, and it's. I'm just thinking for news reporting, the reality is that you're not always going to be able to find a piece of private land where you can arrange it.
Yeah.
Sort it out and take off from.
I think this is where we get into some of the, the real interpretation of it now, because if I'm asked, did I take off or land on council land, but I had my Mavic or my Phantom in my hand, I'm technically, it's not on the land. It's in my hand taking off and landing, or it's on my vehicle roof taking off and landing.
But you are on their land, because you, by definition, you may be taken off from your hand. You're still connected to that land. So I would see that as council land. However, taking off outside it and overflying, that's the biggest concern to me, to be
But
honest.
if you jumped into the air and let it go, then you wouldn't be on the land when the drone took off.
Yeah, exactly. This is where more case law is going to start, bringing interpretation to this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest fear will become if they do stop any kind of overflight. That's where the real danger begins. But, well, I'll let you finish the slides. Before I get so many questions, let you finish, because you might answer half my questions.
I'll just jump in with one thing that isn't a question, but just a general viewpoint, because most of us are chipping in here with a commercial view, but there is a genuine, I think, a target audience for this, a soft audience for them, is the hobbyist, especially in places like Leicester, where you don't want flying in parks. You just slap these on people straight away, and then you're stuck. There's no way you can fly, because a hobbyist can't be paying someone on private land every time they want to have a fly.
Well, model flying clubs do, Ian. Model flying clubs, they rent land. It costs a fortune. Trust me, it costs us a fortune.
Yeah, no, but that isn't how your drones work. If
I was going to get to that bit.
Yeah.
But my concern would be, I'm sure Richard, once this is kind of gone through, I should think one of the connection points should be the BMFA and FPV UK. They need to get in on this as well. If this goes to appeal. But again, I want to see the rest of Richard's slides, because obviously there's a dozen questions and we've still got a load of slides to go. So you'll probably answer half my questions.
Well, I'll do my best. So there are two ways of dealing with a community protection notice. So in this particular case, because we've got a guilty verdict, last week I wrote to the council directly to revoke the community protection notice, and I'll come back to that in a couple of slides time. And I just want you to have that hanging out there, because we're out of time, you see, for appealing a community protection notice, because this was issued sometime in 2021. So if you were to ever, as a pilot, get issued a community protection notice, you've got a right of appeal to the Magistrates Court within 21 days of the issue. And you remember those three tests I spoke of earlier: detrimental effect, persistent or continuing, or unreasonable. That's what we attack here with respect to the appeal. And this is the case we need. So if there's anybody out there that's been served with one of these within the last 20 days, let me know, because we might be able to do something about it. Because this is.
Sorry, I am jumping on your slides, but will this news be promulgated to other councils? Is there a council hotline for this lot of one? We can do this, because might it be the case that all over the UK now, somebody in council offices are typing up those notices saying, "Oh, by the way, all our land's like this now"?
Well, yeah. So what they might do is copy the policy, which I now know the council are going to amend, because obviously in court I pointed out and took it apart and all the rest of it. So they've learned from that lesson with respect to making it more robust, and I expect other councils to pick up on that and then start issuing the warning notices first. So they've got to do the warning notice first, Gary, which we can also attack before they issue a community protection notice. And so I'm sure there is a network within councils. I mean, I've written in the local government lawyer magazine before on drone law, and that goes out to all the local councils around the country. And so
I know as far they do share policies, because the Newcastle's policy was copied by quite a few councils. Because if someone's already got and written a policy, it's seen as a cost saving where you just take their policy. You don't have to write one from scratch. You can just take that as a template and maybe tweak it. And Newcastle's, unfortunately, was an anti-drone policy. So a lot of councils initially adopted that. So I do expect that if Leicester tweak theirs further and put more restrictions in, there'll certainly be some councils that copy it.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I mean, I think I will call out one council, Hillingdon. I think that's one of the worst policies I've ever seen with respect to the way that they go about their business. And they could certainly do with some work. So Hillingdon, you get my details. Maybe we could get you right. So here we have 21 days to appeal community protection notice. And we've also got to argue that the CPN were unreasonable. So this is the whole disproportionate thing about airspace. And it's under that aspect there, we can say, look, you can't do this because it is unreasonable and it's disproportionate with respect to the way that the CPN was designed. And then, point on a material defect or error in relation to CPN is another issue. And of course, it being issued to the wrong person. So 21 days is absolutely key here. If you have been issued one, then you've got a short time frame to deal with it. So interestingly, when you do appeal within the 21 days, the prohibitions in it continue to apply. So if the prohibition is you need to have an approval from us, the local council, in order to fly, and my decision's final and binding, and I'm saying, no, you cannot. You cannot fly until the appeal's been heard, which, as we know, with a backlog in court cases and everything else, could take some months. But you mustn't fly, and that's key here. Because if you did continue to fly and you are in breach potentially, then the argument for forfeiture becomes much stronger on the council side. So
again, can I jump in again? I'm sorry, I'm butting in all the time.
Okay.
One of the things in my old life that balloon drivers used to do was find the angriest farmer they could at the end of the season and try and land there and hope that he would impound the balloon, because there's been several cases where the farmers have then been taken to court for loss of earnings over the winter when we wouldn't have been flying anyway. Hey, so if the council stop, we're a commercial operation, we're flying commercial. If they stop us flying over a huge amount of land, will we be able to get after them for loss of earnings, do you think? And people are talking about the overflight thing. When we spoke last week, we mentioned the overflight and enforcing that. Of course, councils can't enforce that, but or can they? I don't know. But overflight was also an issue as well, wasn't it? And I'm not going to ask another question now. I'm sorry.
It's okay, Gary. No, I think that will be another test we're going to have to look at, because if you end up getting your CPN quashed, then we've got a strong argument to say that because you issued it wrongfully and the court has now quashed it, council, you're now in the hole for some of my loss and damage because you wrongfully issued the CPN, and that I don't believe has been tested in courts. But I'm happy to be educated otherwise, but I'm not seeing anything to indicate that that is the case. And so it will be a case of going to sue the council for your loss and damage as a consequence of their action. Okay, and then of course you've got quash it, modify it, dismiss the appeal, and uphold the CPN. So they may say the CPN is valid. That's what that means. Okay, so this is a big argument that I had in the case, and it was, can I challenge the validity of the CPN as a defence to the prosecution for a breach of it? So in order to challenge whether that CPN is valid, I really got to go to appeal. I've got to take it to another court and get it appealed. But can I challenge it as part of my defence? So all of those issues I told you about, the policy being attached to the CPN and it being inaccurate, can I use that as a defence for the breach of the CPN? Well, the case of Stannard says you cannot, and I'll come on to Stannard in a minute because there's some interesting points that I made in court that I expect councils to take notice of now because of there were some failures with their CPN, but the court didn't take notice of those, and so it's really interesting as to how you can challenge the validity of a CPN with respect to it already being in place. So you are very limited to just those two defense grounds I gave you earlier. To challenge the validity of a CPN, we must do it within the 21 days, is what this case is all about. And yet CPN is a criminal matter, but the magistrates do get civil jurisdiction on it. And this is the case. So these are the last two paragraphs of the case, and this is a postscript. So this is a judge in the case of Stannard advising what should happen in future cases. So they don't have to literally follow this, but here you can see they should operate a system for receiving and adjudicating requests for variation or discharge of CPNs. That's the local council. So I asked the local council if they had a system in place, and they said they did not. So this is how new it is for local councils to now get on board this bandwagon and start using it. So what I did on the end of last week, I wrote to local council requesting them under this case and the law to discharge or revoke the CPN. And I've given them 21 days to respond. If they don't do that, then we have the power under this case to take the local council to court for what's known as a judicial review. And that's taking it to the High Court, where we actually challenge now the council's system of dealing with CPNs. And what's really, really interesting about their CPN is that it was not limited in time. It could go on forever. And here, best practice and consistent with legal certainty, a CPN should be limited in time. When I asked the prosecution witness, where is the expiry date on the CPN, they couldn't point to one because there wasn't one. And that was me getting this case in. So it should be limited in time, and they've got to deal with the request that I've made and provide reasons for doing it. Now, if they say no, now we're in test case territory again, and it's a GoFundMe, Gary, to go for judicial review and pay the fees and the court costs and everything else on that. The other thing that he didn't do, which is what they should do, is relevant information should briefly be given with any CPN about how to seek a variation or discharge. They didn't do that either. The court paid no attention to that because it's in addition to the information required by statute on the appeal.
Hang on a minute. So they're meant to have a system for variation or discharge of CPNs, which clearly they didn't have.
Yeah.
And then even if you could go to them, they don't provide the information on even how to do that. That's a catch-22. That's how to shaft you from behind. Surely that's just wrong.
Yeah, so what they were relying on is the fact in the CPN itself, they provide you with specific details on how to appeal within the 21 days. And that's what they were relying on, which is not what this
That's
case
not that.
says.
That's not that what that says, though.
No, it isn't. So that's quite different from actually going direct to the council and saying, I want to revoke or discharge the CPN, and you've got 21 days to do it. And they come back with reasons, or they don't do it. I mean, you have to imagine now, we've got a pilot here that can't fly anywhere in this council territory from their land, who earns a living from doing so. The only way around it, of course, is to fly from private land, and to
But
find
what about
somebody
the
where you can do that.
overflights? What about the
This is
overflights?
it. So that's also test case territory because they've got to find out who owns the drone that's overflying council land, and B, issue a warning notice or a CPN in order to do that.
I know I said I wouldn't do it, but so can we just confirm that this also precludes this operator from flying over council land as well now?
Yes.
So he cannot fly over council land because Cool Brewdog mentioned that, and he's quite right, of course, that the council shouldn't. Well, you tell us. In my mind, the CAA controls the airspace. The council
Correct.
don't have a right to do that. But if they put this order out and they say they have, then they kind of have.
Yeah. So this is why, in part, Gary, we've got to judicially review the decision because it's based on an incorrect policy that implies that the council have jurisdiction over the airspace, which they don't.
So the judge just said, too difficult. That's something to do with aviation. I don't care, but I'm going to let it go through anyway.
Yeah. So basically, the court knows that we can appeal the case, which we can do. We can go for an appeal on this particular case if we wanted to the Crown Court and deal with it that way. But I actually don't think that's the right way of dealing with this. I think it's going back to the council, challenging them on their decision and then judicially reviewing it. Because we actually take that up a higher court and we get a much firmer decision on the legal basis of the issuance of CPNs to drone pilots.
That does sound the better way to go because the higher the court, the better. And you may as well just, if you can skip a mid-level one and go straight to the top,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you?
And that's right. And so that ties in nicely with the last sentence that I've underlined. The local authority need to consider with care the prohibitions and restrictions imposed to ensure they go no further than is necessary and proportionate. Because at the top here, they constitute a significant interference with an individual's freedom. So they must be clear in their terms and proportionate in their effect. And this is what we're arguing.
So hang on a minute. So this operator who's legal now cannot fly over council land or off their property. That could limit his ability to earn money heavily.
Yeah.
And therefore they're impacting his income and his ability to make a living.
Yes.
So is there any way he can, if this is pulled to bits, is there any way he can go back after them after the event and go, for this many days, you stop me earning, I now want? No.
Because he's been found guilty by the court.
But if he gets
the only way that he could do this is by taking off from private land. Now, in order for a council officer to then serve a CPWN warning notice or CPN, they have to have access to that private land. Now, they won't naturally have permission to do that.
So here's a question then for you. If someone approaches me, I'm flying my drone, right? If someone approaches me and they just want my details, who do I have to give it to and who don't I? So I would expect that a police officer, I have to give my information to. However, a council officer or someone that comes up to me, I should be able to just tell them to, no, that's not happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you're right there. I don't think you're wholly obligated to give your details to a council officer. I'm not 100% on that, but certainly a police officer you would most likely do under the Air Traffic Management and Unmanned Aircraft Act, because they now have significant rights of seizing equipment, searching your vehicle with a warrant, searching your premises, and the requests for you to land your drone and everything else. So the police do have significant powers, and also they can give you a 7-day wonder and ask you to send all of your paperwork into the local police station. Right?
Yes.
But the local,
I just have to add the phrase, because Gatwick.
Yeah. So
the counter unmanned drone policy as well.
So basically, if anyone ever gets challenged, then basically, unless it's a copper, you don't give your details out.
Well, I obviously, being a barrister, I can't give advice because none of you are my client. But
Because you're
what
not
would
paying.
yeah, and you're not paying.
Can someone please start putting it in
So-
the super
but
chats?
if
What
it-
super chat
if it
donate?
was me, I would initially refuse to give the council officer my details,
Okay.
and I would wait until they called a police officer or somebody like that.
Yeah, but you don't have to wait around either, do you? So you could be flying, you get approached by someone, and then you can literally just pack up and walk off, and you don't have to give them any details. You don't actually have to wait around for the police either, do you?
Well,
Because there's no law that says you have to stand here and wait for someone to come.
yeah, potentially that's right. But don't forget, if you're flying a drone, then you've got to comply with your own risk assessment.
Yes.
Because something was to happen, and if you didn't, and the police being a witness that are generally 9 times out of 10 believed by the courts, gave evidence as to what happened, and they said it was your fault, that doesn't help you with your insurance claim.
I get that. Someone's come up to me. I've been flying a drone. They want to know my details because they want to report me. I'm saying no. I've packed my drone and I'm just walking away.
Yeah. Well, they can't detain you. You see, they have no local authority officer has no power to detain you.
But my one concern with this, well, I'll say my one concern. There'll be more than one concern, but another one. It's a very, very valid one. Because really, with it, even like with insurance, like with Moonrock and so on, you don't have to have landowners' permission, and it's not really that it's even landowners. It's you're not trespassing. So in a lot of cases where you are getting private sector permission, you're asking because they own this car park area and this building, but actually they're just a leaseholder on the freehold, which is council land. And I fear that with this ruling, the council could still get you on that, even though you were on leasehold land, but the council still own the freehold.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one too, because ultimately the owner of the infrastructure would be the council. The physical asset itself. They're responsible for maintaining it and and all the rest of it. How the courts would see that, I don't know, because of that point. Conversely, the leaseholder is responsible for some element of maintenance and safety of the building or site or whatever it is. And as long as the drone pilot could safely determine to their risk assessment that they were conducting flight safely, then what would be the problem? So you could see.
I don't think it'd be a problem in general terms, because that's fine at the moment. All I was thinking was with the wording in this particular situation where you've had that order against you, you would be very scared when of flying off from any land thereafter, especially if a lot of it still fell within council ownership at the ultimate end of it, because you don't know yourself then whether you are in breach of it or not, and you don't want to be going to court to find out the judge has interpreted different to what you thought, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I think and this is what we're relying on. We're going to be relying on judges' interpretations, which will form the basis of case law ultimately, which has been happening for hundreds of years. The one of the issues we've got is that we're going to have to spend time educating judges and others as to what the parameters actually are.
Nailed it. That's the thing I was going to say. This seems to be a worldwide problem. We've got judges ruling on matters that they have, their only experience is what they read through the media. They're as biased as anybody else. Drones bad, all that sort of stuff. So when they make decisions, for example, the challenge to the remote ID bill or remote ID rule in the USA, the judge obviously was completely misinformed. Drones are coming and lots of them, which we know isn't the fact, but they're basing their decisions on what they've learned through the media, which gives them a very distorted distorted view of the world. So the judgments will obviously be biased by that distorted view. Do we need a higher level of education or a higher level of performance? And even in the case of council officers who have this power to issue these orders, do they need to have some kind of training and have some kind of certification to do so? Because doing it out of ignorance doesn't benefit anybody, does it?
No, it doesn't. And there have been lots of. I mean, one thing I say about the legal system: don't come to court seeking justice. It's not a justice system; it's a legal system, and and that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to frame the law, which is one of the reasons why I got involved. When the last Act of Parliament came in with the House of Lords to try and carve out the commercial pilot piece from police powers, which obviously didn't happen. But that's why getting at the law right at the front end as it's being made was what I tried to do there. But yeah, somewhat unsuccessful that time.
No, take off a landowning position has got nothing to do with the council. So, Gordog, no, it's only airspace, and the only thing that can happen, hopefully now, is if it goes to the higher court, as Richard has said, I think you're going to try and do the appeal and go that way. If it goes that way, hopefully judges and Richard can go to the top courts and go, look, it's already defined by the CAA. They govern the airspace. It's already set out in law. This is where it's all found. They can go read up on it as judges do. They have researchers as well, don't they, Richard, that go, this is da da da. They can look it up at the higher courts and they'll go, right, airspace overflight, everything else, that is CAA rules. We're not going to go there because we don't want to. Yeah. But they could go, however, the takeoff and landing place, we will say the council has full permission on that one because the CAA have said that's nothing to do with them. However, airspace is also nothing to do with the council. And
but isn't there a problem? Isn't there a problem? We have these local laws which take a different tack. Like if I beat someone to death with a drone, it's not a breach of civil aviation regulations, but it is a breach of a different law. And you can't say, but CAA controls drones. So if you hit someone with a drone and kill them, it's not a police matter or a council matter. It's CAA matter. Surely there's the tack they're taking is that this is not a breach of civil aviation regulations. We're not dealing with civil aviation. We're dealing with the fact that someone flying a drone is annoying somebody or causing a public nuisance. So it doesn't matter. We are stopping the public nuisance by prohibiting them from flying over public land. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether CAA own that or not. We're not relying on aviation law. We're relying on common law of the land, which we have control over.
Well, that's right to a degree. There is, there is one particular case which was made a good few years ago now on nuisance and what constitutes nuisance, and it's got to be something that's really persistent, flying over your land, in order for it to be effective.
Well, that's now set as 2 flights. That's now been defined. That's 2 flights. That's been logged, and the CPM has been enforced.
It's logged only 2 flights to establish that there was a breach of the order.
Oh, right. Sorry.
So it's just those 2 flights because the order had been issued. It was taken in court that those 2 flights constituted breach. If those 2 flights hadn't happened, then it would be very hard for them to argue breach.
So if he had flown from somewhere else and the drone hadn't been seen, then nothing would have happened.
Probably, yeah.
So what if the council decides? What if the council decides that people flying drones over their land is likely to cause fear, anxiety, and distress? Which I gather that's a breach of different law. Can they use that as a justification for banning people?
So it won't be a different law, Bruce. It's all about those 3 legal tests in order to issue a warning notice first. So it's got to be unreasonable, it's got to be persistent, and it's got to be detrimental to those.
I mean, what you've already made clear already, though, is those 3 tests, they weren't met in reality because, as we all know, drone flights, as you alluded to, that brief, that infrequent, it isn't a persistent nuisance. It's not like someone that's continually playing their stereo all day or someone that's doing DIY all day long, or even where I mean, I've never even seen this to this degree where people are on trial bikes near land, which people don't like. I don't understand why they don't like it, but considering we're noisier than drones, it should be added. So really what's happened here is someone's just been a NIMBY and it doesn't like the fact there's a drone about, assuming they're being filmed by it, or there's just the takeoff and landing noise, even though it wouldn't bother any of us, they've taken exception to it, or they have some other motive that's made them complain about this. But you're just concerned with those tests, when you look to other antisocial issues, it is such a light breach of it in comparison. I mean, I do think there's a mixed thing here, because I think in this situation, as a drone pilot, you'd stop yourself getting in that position in the first place. But
oh well, yeah, I suspect freedom of information requests will be going to that council, and we'll be going for. Did you speak to the race course about drones? Any emails we want?
Yeah, it does need freedom of information, finding some motives here, because it does seem quite odd the lengths they've gone to here. But yeah, I do fear with hobbyists and parks, because that's where you will get. All it takes is just one person to be annoyed by someone flying their racing drone, and that's it. This whole shenanigans we've had going on here then becomes a problem, and your commercial operator, sorry, your hobby operator isn't going to be taking this to court. They're just going to pack up the drone, stick it on eBay, and it's a bit of a sad end to it, really.
From a pragmatic point of view, this order only affects the person it was issued against. So he could get someone else to fly the drone. They'd issue another order. Then you could defend it in court, challenge it in court, and effectively set a precedent that says this doesn't meet the level of requirement to issue one of these orders. Is that an option?
Oh, when you say get somebody else to fly it, Bruce, how do you mean that practically?
Well, who was the order against? Who was the order being taken against? The one person that was doing this operation. Well, he could get someone else to do it. Therefore, the order doesn't apply because it's not the original person doing the flying. Then when the council tries the same trick, you take it to court and you then challenge it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're already started that journey. So in 21 days' time, we'll be in a position where we'll understand what the council's response is to their own CPN.
I guess just on Bruce's point, if you went and tried to test it again, because there's already been this judgment, the council's in a stronger position already, because they'll just point to, well, we won last time.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be challenging the judge's decision. You're challenging the order, challenging the issue of the order in that 21-day period when you can file an appeal against it. That's what should have happened originally, because the order is really invalid. It doesn't meet the criteria as far as we can see.
I guess the question I'd ask, is it going to end up with the same judge?
No, it won't. No, it'll end up in a much higher court. So that's why I think.
Oh no, what you're saying now is a higher court. What I was saying was, if you put a new pilot up to do it, and the council went through it again,
I'd be surprised if it ended up in front of the same judges, just because of the nature of the courts and how busy they are.
Okay.
Ideally, it wouldn't get that far anyway, because you would challenge the issue of the order, which means it could never go to court if you succeed in that. Wouldn't there be a much cheaper option than taking it to a higher court?
It could be, yeah. It probably not could be. It probably will be. Judicial review is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. We're going to a much higher court, and it's much more complex in terms of legal argument, as opposed to just arguing whether that CPN is valid or not within the 21 days. And on the basis of those three tests, detrimental effect, persistent or continuing, or being unreasonable, as long as we had an argument which subverts any one of those, or all three together, which I think we would have, I think we'd be on fairly strong ground to say that issuance of a CPN is unlawful. On the reasonable grounds test, the issuing officer has to establish on reasonable grounds that is the case.
I guess
they not, obviously.
I guess the question is, though, if it went to judicial review, the council loses. I'm assuming they'll be hit with a massive legal bill. then they're never going to go down that road again, and no other council's going to want to go down that
right.
road again. So you kind of you hit the nail on the head, and you put the whole issue to bed once and for all. Where I guess if the other option, you're probably not putting the issue to bed, and it still doesn't stop some other council being a nuisance at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, in the context of where we are now globally, with councils stretching the budget, not having all the resources in place, are they really going to spend a fortune fighting a case all the way to judicial review? I don't know. Maybe one might, take a punt for it on behalf of all the others. I don't know.
They just put up the council taxes to cover it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, they don't always have the freedom to put the council tax up, because sometimes there are hard limits put in place. But he does beg the question, actually, if he did get pushed to judicial review, try and get some local report covering it, and then you've got your local residents say, "Oh, why are we spending all this money to fight an issue that's bothered one person or maximum 3 people?" I think we said potentially. Why is the entire district paying for what sounds like 3 people being NIMBYs?
And of course, you could do both. There's no reason why you couldn't do both, because one of the problems you've got is this guy can't do any work while this order is in place. So there's nothing to stop him using an independent third or second person to fly the drone while you are pursuing the judicial review thing. That gets him back earning money to pay your bill, because that won't be small. And, wouldn't that be a pragmatic approach to do both at the same time?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is pragmatic, but it's also about funding, Bruce. It's not everybody has the ability to fund something like this. I mean, this took almost 6 months to get to that point, where we had a trial, and it's a lot of time and investment to actually get there.
Pro bono.
Yeah.
You don't need to earn money. Should you be a charity? Become a non-for-profit. I am, even though I don't want to be.
I'm one of those.
You're retired.
To move that on, though, I think the serious point is if we were to say this judicial review, it needs some sort of fundraiser to do it. And then the question is, will people actually put their hands in the pocket to do it, or will they're not? And then it just falls at the wayside. But I think it does need thinking about. I do think if you get FPV UK and BFA and that on board.
So I'm not making enough money on the betting. Surely they're just betting on these races, and the betting returns would be paying for the bill. If you get that few seconds of extra advantage by seeing the horses cross the line before it goes on the telly, that's the whole idea, isn't it?
Well, that is the problem, isn't it, for them? And people were talking about that in the chat. That basically is the loss to the betting industry, isn't it? It's the live nature of their video allows people to keep betting right up to the wire, which you can't do if you're watching on normal broadcast TV, because it's just very slightly delayed. I think I could be right or wrong, generally wrong, but I think that's about it, isn't it?
Something like that. But Richard, here's the ultimate question then. So here's a good one for you. So this guy, for example, can't fly his drone from council land. He will get told off if he flies his drone, correct?
So he would what?
He gets in trouble if he flies his drone, correct?
Yes.
Now, however, I'm a drone pilot with a GVC. What happens if I fly his drone with his operator ID on it? Because he's not flying his drone. Is it against his company or is it against him personally? Can I fly that drone for him and just piss the council off even more?
So it's a really interesting point. It goes back, it ties into the point you made earlier about giving your details. What if you are a company and you rock up and you've got your logo on the side of your truck or your van with all your details? The council then have the information, don't they? And you've seen that you're exposed to a £20,000 fine with respect to a company.
But it might not be their drone. Just because their van's in the car park doesn't mean it's their drone that's flying.
No, it doesn't.
You've got to prove that drone went in that van.
Yeah, well, you have to, and this is where it'll come down to some of the evidence. And as I said, this court particularly preferred the evidence of the prosecution, and that's the risk you take. So that could be quite a big risk. I mean, you could prove that it's not your drone. You could say, look, the operator ID for my drones in my operations manual is X, and we're going into all of that.
That's not. I'm actually asking: is it against him or his company? Because if it's against him himself, then in the operator ID for his company is on the drone.
Yeah.
Then can I fly it? Where if it's against his company and I fly it, therefore I would understand I am breaching the CPN.
Yeah. So the CPN is about that person flying a drone. So that person individually flying a drone. That could be any drone.
So I could fly. I can then. What I'm saying is, I can now fly his M300 and keep his business going because I can go and film that race course for him now with his drone because it's against him, not his drone or his business.
Correct. And then you're just waiting for the council to come along and issue you with a warning notice
and forfeiture. Would they forfeit it then because they've got said as long as the drone is there, it still represents a breach of the order?
Yeah. So don't forget, I did show you on my slides there is potential for seizure pre-conviction.
Yeah, but they've got to get me and know who I am.
Yeah, they have.
Maybe they watch the stream.
But
someone's watching it.
No one watches the stream.
You got to be careful, is what I'd say there. Certainly, if it was me, I would want to be extremely careful. Let me put it that way.
I live for adrenaline.
But to be honest, with the range now on the cameras of the drones, I'm beginning to wonder, he was flying the M300 though, wasn't he? So, you can be a good way from a race course now and you can see what's going on. He's going to have to find someone nice nearby who owns a property where he can go knock on their door. It's not council owned, rent their back garden, because there is someone that does that up north somewhere.
That's normally how it goes, yeah.
Yeah, they rent someone's back garden for like £100 for the afternoon. They just take off from the garden, go straight up, and they just they're filming. And that would be the way he could beat it as well. That would be the other way.
But I mean, some journalists have pointed out, and this too, it is a bit daft, all this, because by the same token, you could just get a ladder in their back garden and be filming it, and you're doing exactly the same thing. So there's the idea
we must welcome Sean. We haven't welcomed Sean. Welcome Sean.
Why must we
the chat lost? So actually, Richard, this bloke's got a criminal record now. Boom.
Yeah.
And how much of a fine?
So I got the fine down from almost 5,000, just below £5,000 down to 1,200. And I stopped them from seizing the drone.
And they did want to seize his drone. So that's where we're at. And also he can't, not only can he not take off on land from council land, he can't fly over it either. Of course, that's not it's not how things are, but that's the net result.
That's the net result at the moment. That's right.
That's the finest thing you've said all night, Sean.
Yeah, sure.
You need to unmute yourself, mate.
I always find that I speak much more sense on mute.
Yes, we thought so. Go ahead, mate.
Did they use a community protection notice then to as the tool, as it were? Is that what he's breached to then be fined, etc.?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. That's a concern.
Yes, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really scary, Sean. It's scary.
Yeah, I had a conversation with some people regarding community protection notices and the potential impact a week or two ago, actually, which actually prompted me to email Richard. Yes, it is a very, very scary landscape.
I was a bit busy at the time, Sean, so sorry for that.
No, that's not a problem. That's not a problem. It was a panicked. Okay, what now? and in actual fact, of course, as always does, it was Richard's name that came up in that conversation as well. But yeah, it is a concerning thing.
I think the biggest thing that I can take away from this, and so thankful to Richard for coming on, is as soon as you get that notice, you've got 21 days. Those 21 days, you get in touch with Richard. That is it, plain and simply. You reach out to
That
Richard.
is it, yeah.
And anyone that wants his number, by the way, just rewind to about 50 minutes, watch the video, skip to 50 minutes. His number is on the screen there and his email. Just get in touch with Richard as soon as.
In fact, get him on a retainer now. Pay the retainer, so he's going to be available.
Christmas is coming up.
Richard is a legend because
that needs addressing here. That is, and it's been going on for ages now. And it's so frustrating. It's why haven't got Moonrock and Cover Drone and the like offering, whatever it costs a month extra, 5, 10, whatever, offer proper legal cover. So when drone pilots get themselves in this bother, that covers them there, can pay Richard's fees. All this is done because even wanting to go to Richard, you are still going to be in a panic at that point of, oh, geez, I've got to pay some legal fees that, I'm not expecting. And then just all that thing of, this is just another worry now that in operating a drone, you're going to be targeted and you need legal backup. And the likes of, as I found out, is if you have like NUJ, they won't actually cover you if you get in these kind of circumstances. It's always out of your own pocket. So people need to keep that in mind. And there genuinely is the need now for a product to be out there that people can just go, I'm going to buy that. And the people will be willing to pay. It's cheaper to pay.
Help some guys out before by drafting a letter for them to show the police if they do get pulled. I mean, about a month ago, I took a call from somebody that had the police with them there and then. And I had to tell them what to say in order for the police to stop taking their equipment whilst they were filming. And luckily that worked. But I would say it wouldn't always. They caught me out of the shower, so that helped as well.
Can I just say, right, you need to speak to Simon Ritterband at Moonrock. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know Simon. I've met him a few times actually. So
you need to put together a package between you that's a bolt-on to the Moonrock insurance in some way, and go, I am going to be your legal defense. You need to come up with a deal with Moonrock or insurance or even Cover Drone, whichever one. But I'm just going to say Simon because of Moonrock and I'm with them. Even if it costs an extra $5 a month, it doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's got to be something in there because we're going to start needing it more and more because we can't let this thing continue.
Look, if councils can get some of their legal costs back in a case, the risk for them is going to be now a lot lower than it would have been otherwise. And so I think the local councils now are going to be sure-footed with respect to putting out more of these community protection warning notices to start with and seeing how they get on with it. Because there's absolutely nothing to lose because they'll already have an antisocial behavior officer on their books, working. And so this just gets added to the portfolio. You see a drone pilot, go and slap him with a CPWN, and then we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Many local authorities and police forces are highly accomplished on that side of things now, and they have, as you say, they have these developed teams in place. So yeah, it is something which they can roll out very quickly.
Yeah.
Now, I earned my UK law degree by watching auditors, so excuse my ignorance. But I noticed the thing seems to be that if you're approached by police in the UK, you do not have to give your details at all unless they have reasonable grounds to suspect you of committing a crime. So the police can't get that data out of you. What gives a council officer any more right than the police?
They don't, simply put.
But the one concern I was going to suggest was if the insurance industry doesn't do something, I think they'll ultimately shoot themselves in the foot anyway. Because if you have all your drone pilots ultimately being penalised and not being able to fly in fear of a council taking action, you're going to have less drone pilots taking out insurance because they'll be packing up and sticking the drones on eBay, especially hobbyists would, because you just haven't got the financial clout to be fighting these things.
Most operators won't be able to operate at all, though, Ian. It creates an unusable system because councils take too long to come back to you. So you've got a roof that wants inspecting. Councils go, you can't fly in our airspace. You can't do this, you can't do that. All of a sudden, trying to do a simple job becomes so hard to do because councils don't have proper procedures. You try and reach any particular council department, it's like trying to pull a tooth out of a dead horse's head. It's so long drawn, it's unreal.
And we all know how hard that is.
It's going to create...
It's a strange analogy, that, because I'm thinking not many of us have tried that.
It's just going to take so long to get done. It'll destroy the drone industry at a certain point. Costs will go up for drone companies operating. Time spans just become outrageous. I mean, it'd be worse than trying to get into a flight restriction zone. It'll be easier to fly in a flight restriction zone than it will to fly near council or on council land or near councils or doing any overflying. It's just going to become hell.
On that point, so in the part of the prosecution's evidence was that they called the CAA and they spoke to an expert at the CAA who said that most likely a criminal offence had occurred.
Who needs friends?
So most likely the guy had a PDRA 01, so it would be the predetermined risk assessment 01. CAA ops manual approved, and they most likely committed an offence.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Did I just hear that? That was in evidence. A phone call to the CAA and a supposed expert at the CAA in criminal law, notifying them that a criminal act had probably taken place.
That used to be Richard. Richard called himself in the past. He said, "Hello, Richard." In the past,
I went back in time. That'd be amazing. No, it wasn't an expert in criminal law, Sean. It was an expert in aviation law that said, obviously, that a criminal offence has most likely taken place. And that was in their witness evidence.
They did extraordinarily well to get an answer of that kind of specific answer from anybody at the CAA. With all, I love many of the people at the UK CAA, but to ask them to give you, can I fly my drone over this house, and you'll get a very wordy refer to regulation type of answer. To get a specific yes, there sounds like there was criminal activity. That to me sounds incredible.
Of course, no person was named at the CAA.
No, of course. I'm not possibly
suggesting
this
could be the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah. Oh, well, I was going to ask you earlier, Ian, the FOIA thing. I mean, exactly how many people are in the frame for FOIAs at the council, at the racecourse, at the whatever? Are they all sort of entities that? Sorry,
so it's public sector, but not private sector. You couldn't do a racecourse, but the council, CAA, and all that, their target. The only one that's a bit of a bizarre one. So I think it's a bit of a loophole, really. You've got like Nats, where I think it's. My impression was that was like half public owned, or there was a shareholding, but that doesn't count. It's got to be entirely public sector for you to be able to put a freedom of information in.
Yeah, because it's going to be quite hard to get too much information on all of this. And I've got to say, Richard, so far you've done this. You've done this on your own bat, haven't you? Pro bono. Is that the right word? I think that's the right word, isn't it? That's the right word.
That's correct.
This is a huge problem for the UK. A problem that's got to be faced. People like ARPAS and all the grown-ups they've got to have they can't sit on a fence now. They've got to be on one side or other side of said fence.
They sat on the fence all the way through Gatwick.
Well, no, but they can't, and the community can't let that happen. If there's a fence-sitting organisation, then that organisation probably hasn't earned the right to represent that community.
It doesn't just sit on the fence. It will say which side of the fence is the DFT on. We're sitting on that side.
No, fair enough. Well, but then
it's
at least we know.
Is the case, but that is I can only go on by actions, and that
Sure, yeah.
So I mean, if you look at the evidence that Charles York was giving on Gatwick, to go back to that, our pals are sat next to, they're in that same meeting, and not just nonsense.
Well, where I'm trying to take this, I'm not disagreeing with you. Where I'm trying to take this is, it probably means it probably does need to be a pot of money somewhere, a pot of gold somewhere, or something needs to happen. And the community actually has to, for the first time in the history of the community proper, coalesce and do something about this, or come up with an action plan. I've got my ranty head, I'm sorry, but I can just see it. I can see loads of people looking the other way and going, "Oh, it's never going to affect me. What's it really matter?" I can hear that left, right, and centre. Has been the problem with model aviation flying groups, with commercial groups. Is this not the, think of an analogy, big thing that needs to be stood up for now? I don't know. I'll stop ranting. I'll let you guys I try and rant away from me.
If I win,
you stop further action as well. I think the drone community always rolls over, and until it stands up and says no, enough, and people see that it's doing that, it'll stop the boundaries being pushed all the time. So it'd be good. Obviously, a lot of you here have got YouTube channels with a lot of followers. If you go down the route, I'm looking at you, Sean. There. If you go down the route, if you go down the route of trying to get a fundraiser, I think it's definitely worth pushing it on the channels.
To be honest, and this is. Yeah, this is an interesting topic, actually, because it's something that I hear, and me and Bruce will both hear in the US community as well, where we hear, we need to do this, we need to rally this, we need to rally the troops, we need to X, Y, Z. The problem I find in any hobby or industry, but particularly in the drone hobby and industry, is that once a group gets above a certain size, and I'm only talking a couple of hundred really, it starts to become a bureaucracy of itself, and it starts to stagnate because they don't know what to do. And, now we're more interested in the fact that we're getting subs in and that type of thing. And I give a good example of, if you try and do it openly and you try and do it with free spirit, which is actually Bruce's attempt to rally the troops and to rally people together. And if that kind of voice can't get the numbers, I don't think that's going to be the answer. In an ideal world, that is the answer. But we have a very clear problem that we almost need to have a Richard Ryan sat in the back of our car whenever we're out on drone operations. And to me, that's almost we need to deal with that issue at an even higher level. That this is a situation that we've arrived at that has to change, frankly, and that isn't necessarily a community thing. I think it's more of a legal issue.
Yeah, that's right. Sean's right. It's a case of, in this hobby or in this industry, they don't worry about the problems until they affect them. Someone else's problem doesn't affect me. And that's the problem. There's no cohesiveness. There's no unified voice. Even in America, where you got the FPV Freedom Coalition, which is supposed to represent all the FPV flyers right across America, they have their town hall meetings. And I go to them fairly regularly. They have 6 or 7 people in the entirety of America turn up to a meeting to discuss the future and organise FPV, which one would think there would be many, many thousands of people flying FPV. Well, it's enough for new products to come out every day almost. All those people, they don't care enough to even just attend an online meeting and have their say or see what's going on. And if you look at the YouTube videos they make from the live meeting, they get like 12 or 13 views. People just don't give a damn anymore until it actually affects them. And that's the problem. It's hard to take preemptive action until you've become a victim. And we need to work out a mechanism to try and achieve that, though, to get the funds in place. Having said that, if we look at the challenge to the remote ID rule in America, they got a lot of money for that because it was actually something tangible and substantive that was going to affect everybody. So they got a lot of backing for that. It's just a shame that right from the get-go, I said it's never going to succeed because it was easy to predict that the path that the regulators would take to defend it, and that's exactly what happened. So this could be one of those pivotal things that will get enough people, but again, probably only in the UK because it's only affecting UK people, and it's a small community. What you need is someone to come in and sponsor it, someone who's going to just take it on their own bat. They've got heaps of money, Sean. I'm not looking at you. Heaps of money, but he puts £5 into every stream. He's amazing. They've got heaps of money to fund this thing, or maybe a benevolent lawyer who's just going to do it all off his own back.
All
I
off his
don't know.
own- we've already
that
found
guy-
the salute.
No. Cher's husband. What's his name? Bono. Pro Bono. That's him.
Bono, yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, he's Oasis, or was it? U2, someone? Yeah, one of those pop stars.
I mean, I think the frustrating thing with this, I think the drone community in the UK is big enough where if everyone chipped in a couple of quid, it'd be enough. But yeah, I'm under no illusions. It's like, I mean, I saw this from previous DFT, the questionnaire thing they sent around when they're trying to push fins and all that nonsense before. Put lots of video out, and then to be fair, there were like 3,000 people chipped in, so it wasn't a bad number by any means. But they're not the numbers that you need to make difference when you're trying to bring funds in together to fight something like this. But
as Mark said, BMFA or FPV UK, they are groups that already have members. They could have the funds. They could do this, and they've got something to gain.
With numbers they've got, they could just get everyone to chip in a couple of quid. That ends up being a lot of money, but it's whether
is the conversation then with insurers is the conversation then to not do that, is the conversation with insurers to, as was mentioned earlier, please set up some sort of legal insurance for us, and or bolt it onto your BMFA or bolt it onto your FPV UK membership, and then maybe councils will be a little bit more afraid to jump in because they know there's going to be
it's a shame Simon's not on this call, so just jump in for a second. But what I'm thinking, a good way, if you said to people, like with commercials, it's fine to say, pay something every month and you personally get covered because that's what you need. But I think what you need is almost like a sinking fund where you get BMFA and FPV UK to add £2.50 onto both of their subs, which they put in a pot every year, and just use it to fight bigger issues that are going to affect the entire community. So you could do one here, take the councils on, and also it could be used for, other legal issues along similar lines that come up in future.
There's a lot of common sense to what you say there, Ian, but there again is the other side of the issue of when I was talking about these communities having numbers and then that becoming a bureaucracy. A bureaucracy is also politically scared. So I don't think you're going to get the BMFA and the FPV UK going up against something like this for all sorts of reasons from a political point of view.
I mean, BMFA maybe not, but Simon Dale is by no means a person that's scared away from tackling issues.
No, but I wonder if it would be too political still. I love the idea personally. That's just personally. I love the idea of adding it as an add-on on insurance in terms of covering that person, and anything that we can do to fight it in an overall legal sense. I think it's excellent. I do wonder what a really well organised GoFundMe would raise. The GoFundMes in the States that raise many thousands of dollars for people in legal situations, etc., and in individual circumstances. So I think if it was organised properly, yes, I think it could definitely have an impact. One question I had for Richard very quickly, and Richard, please excuse my naivety, legal naivety, when I ask this question, but when we're talking about fighting back against this kind of decision and these kind of notices being used against drone operators, is there an issue of the point of view that, yes, that local authority may not want to spend to fight back, but would there be national funding put into it to protect that whole system and this new community protection notice system? Could that happen, or would it solely be down to the local authority to fight it?
Yeah, I think we covered some of this before you joined, Sean. I think it'll be testing for the local authority. It'll come out of their own legal budget, their own legal spend. But because this will be a test case, what they may do is trawl other councils that say they've got really big problems with drone operators. Do you want to contribute some money towards the budget? And I'm sure they'll come to an arrangement to do something like that.
Yeah, which is with that, and that was my fear when I heard the sort of fighting back sort of side of things, is that would there be a rallying call? Because of course that whole system is used for so many other things that others would want to protect it for other reasons apart from drone use, of course. So it's
I think, yeah, I think so. You know, I think when we talk about the insurance piece, we often see these now in our home contents insurance policies, don't we? A legal bolt on, and you know, the precedent in the insurance world is well and truly set with this. I mean, you know, in a previous life, I spent a couple of years working for a global insurance broker on complex claims, and you know, the legal aspect to it was always a considerable bolt on with respect to defending, you know, clients, not only clients' interest but also the insurer's position. You know, which is worth stating here because they've got to protect their balance sheet as well against any loss that the pilot might incur, right? So there's definitely a commercial discussion there to have with insurers, I'm sure. And I you know, I spoke to insurers many years ago about this, and I'm surprised they haven't done anything about it with respect to a legal bolt-on. But you know, that's just the way it is. Sometimes it's all about what value can they derive from the policy, which is why we've seen a couple of insurers actually leave the market because they just aren't getting the value that they thought there was in this. But what they haven't realised is this is a long-term game, not a short-term option. Couple of questions that came up, Gary, if I may just pivot towards those. So there's one about ultravirus and the concept of ultravirus. This is all about a council or a government or a governmental body acting outside of their authority. And this, we could argue, is a case where the council are acting outside their authority, acting ultravirus with respect to their restriction over flying over land as denoted within their policy, and that would become a question on appeal, so, or a judicial review. And that's why, you know, issuing this notice to this council to revoke the CPN is going to be incredibly important, because that might give us the opportunity to argue that the council's acting ultra-vires with respect to the way that they've formulated their policy to prevent drone operators from taking off from or over council land or council managed land as well. You know, knowing that they're significant landowners is certainly going to have a big impact. So that's the point on ultravirus. And then there was another point about layering of law, and I think that this really goes to the bylaw piece, where we see bylaws. So the whole point about a bylaw is it's a way of the council putting a local law in place that reflects local concerns with respect to a prohibition. So community protection notices and bylaws can prevent somebody from doing something or force somebody to do something. So they can go both ways. And the bylaw should really go out for public consultation to all stakeholders, but can't be duplicitous. What does that mean? It means that you can't put in place a local law that already duplicates existing national law, because it's just too expensive, and you know, everything else that goes with it. So the layering of law has got to be considered, is the point here. It's got to be efficient and effective. So we've got air navigation orders which regulate the airspace. So the council arguing in their bylaw that they want to regulate airspace should not be permitted. And again, if the council did that in a bylaw, that would be acting ultra-vires too. So I think that's those couple of points is probably worth just picking up.
Oh, it's a can of worms, isn't it? I deliberately didn't get. I asked Richard last week if there'd been a verdict. He said there hadn't been. I deliberately didn't tonight because I wanted to react genuinely to what it is. I'm shocked. Is the bottom line. Really, Richard? What can we do? What can be done to help you so far? It's getting this story out far and wide would be a good start, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, we're now in the world of the can of worms is open, the dog's bolted, right? It'll be interesting to see what councils pick up on this in the next weeks and months. I mean, we could potentially say We might not see much activity because we're now hitting winter, so there won't be much flying going on because of weather constraints and everything else. And we might see that pick up as we come into spring and out of spring into summer, most certainly. Especially when it comes to media and event filming as well, and those kind of things. But it's this whole aspect of councils wanting permission for people to fly drones. Especially if you've got a GVC or a PFCO. I mean, we've already gone through all this already with respect to civil aviation permission. But to your point, I think that getting the message out there, Gary, is going to be really, really key here, because as soon as somebody's issued with a community protection warning notice, really they just don't want to think it's like a parking ticket. And if I pay it, it's half the fine in 21 days. It's much more than a parking ticket. It could look like a parking ticket. It's just come from a council officer. He's not even a policeman. It's nothing, right? And that's the perception I think we've got to get around here. I think this is community protection warning notice. It's a criminal penalty. It falls under the antisocial behavior laws and regulations. You really do need to pay attention to it. So it should have information on there, as I've described earlier, about appeal and what to do and write to the council. So if you do get a warning notice, deal with it then. If you get a protection notice, a community protection notice, you definitely need to appeal that or lodge an appeal within 21 days, because if you missed it, we're then in breach territory, and now we're trying to use those two statutory defences about reasonable excuse. What did I say the other one was? Or you took reasonable steps to comply with the order. So that's a difficult argument to manufacture, because every case will be dependent upon its own facts. I'd have to craft an argument for every person with respect to, did they take reasonable steps to comply with the order, or did they have some reasonable excuse for failure to comply with it? So that makes the legal argument a bit more difficult. And then once you're in breach territory, you're then having the fight about forfeiture as well. So, if your business is a company or a drone pilot, if you're getting to CPN and you've missed your 21 days, you really are facing quite a battle there.
So that is the big takeaway, is do something about it fast if you're unlucky enough to receive one of those. And can I just ask, Scoobs did ask earlier, if they picked you up flying from your socials over the council land, would that still keep you in? I think that was the question, Scoobs. Would that still find you in breach of an order?
I think that would be evidence that they would probably bring in, much like we've seen, the CAA use with people now that, weren't flying, with permission, over the City of London or something like that. So if they could determine from your drone quite easily that you were flying over council land or whatever it was, I would think that they would try and put that in as evidence to support the community protection warning notice or the community protection notice itself. But I think initially they would have to collar you on the spot doing what you're doing.
So this is a criminal prosecution, so it's beyond reasonable doubt rather than on the balance of evidence.
That's right, Bruce. Yeah.
So
Richard put his number up again. Change your name to your telephone number, Richard. Yeah.
Well, my big two takeaways is one, the 21 days, as you say, Richard. But the second thing is the judges completely ignore the council's cock-up of the CPN, what it says. It doesn't matter what that CPN actually says, because they completely ignore the legal spiel.
The notice itself was right. The notice itself was right. It was the fact that the notice relied on their council drone and model aircraft policy,
which was wrong.
Within that was wrong.
Yeah, but that's my point. So what they did, they completely ignored that the CPN had.
But isn't it two wrongs don't make a right, in the fact that the bloke flew? The bloke flew again.
They didn't need to consider it because we were after that time. That consideration would be the warning notice or during the appeal time frame.
Yeah, but to me,
Thanks,
you're in
Keith.
court.
Thanks,
That information is still misleading
Mark,
incorrect that they used.
missed a
Therefore,
bit-
it should be thrown out. But
You missed a bit earlier where
That's-
Richard said that you're actually dealing with law, not justice.
yeah. Basically, that CPN could actually say it relied on anything it wanted to, because
Correct.
if you ignore it after 21 days,
Yeah.
actually, it's kind of irrelevant. We'll just make that up then.
It's almost to get to Gary's usual point that he hits me with. It's just too much common sense on this.
Common sense,
It's not
yes.
allowed.
So if you ignore the order and
Red
you don't
card.
do an appeal, you're basically saying, I accept what is in the order is true and proper, and you can't rescind that later.
Yeah.
Almost, Bruce, with the exception of, did you take all reasonable steps to comply with it, or did you have some other reasonable excuse for failure to comply with it? Those really are only two options to get out. And as we've discovered now, we're now going through that case law learning cycle. As we've discovered now, the judges didn't prefer that as an argument.
Those judges
He
need to
said
kick
in his
up the arse.
matter-of-fact way.
Those judges need to kick up the arse for not following. I used to have a bit of faith in our judges, not anymore.
I refer you
No,
to
I mean,
Ian's
in fairness
earlier
to my
comment
profession, some judges actually do an absolutely sterling job.
Yeah, I'm sure some do. You just didn't have the right ones.
Yeah. Well, we've got.
You're not talking about the currency stealing, are you? They wouldn't be influenced by money, would they? No.
Well,
look,
I think
I'm
freedom of
going
information
to have
on
to
that council to see.
I'm going to have to call this closed very shortly because I'm about to lose power here. Although, but I don't think I can switch it off if the power goes off, or I don't think any of you can, which is a pity.
No.
But I just wanted to, if I may, Richard, I wanted to just to highlight, if you don't mind, just you had a legal issue that brought you to, because I think this nicely sums up to me why you're here and why you're helping, because you had a legal problem that was wrong and you decided to fix it yourself, I think, didn't you?
That's very cryptic. No? Very cryptic, Gary.
Oh, well, I don't know.
There've been a few legal issues on the way, and I'm trying to figure out which one you're talking about.
The one that affected you. I thought you had something that affected yourself
why I got into
personally.
law initially. Do you
exactly.
mean?
That's
right.
what I mean.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I was falsely arrested once, and I didn't know what my rights were, and so in order to deal with that in the future, I then became a lawyer. I went back to university and qualified all over again. Well, not all over again. I got a law degree and a double master's in law and carried on. But yeah, it's about really understanding what my rights were, which I thought was important.
Is there any truth to the rumor that you're becoming an auditor?
Well, he kind of did, didn't he? He audited the law on his own. But I
was recently educated into what these auditors are, and I have no intention at the moment of becoming an auditor.
But it underlines to me. It's why I was some American. I put my name behind him or some other crass thing they say. But that sort of honesty and that sort of thing is to undertake that journey proves Richard's worthiness in our community. I can't think of all this rubbish in our community, but he has stood up. So far he has stood up for this person, and he's been there for this person, and it's between us, whatever it is, whatever it looks like, however we can help or change things as a community, we've actually got to. I know communities don't work, but we've got to start thinking about this properly and get something done. So thank you very much on behalf of the community, Richard, for what you've done so far. So I've got to wrap it up because my lights are going to go out. Dear viewers, wherever you are in the world, thank you very much. If you're in the UK, please let your friends know. I'm sure Sean and all the bigger channels will start shouting about this now. But we've got to get this 21 days out there. People have got to know about this. And we've got to get the word out, and something's got to be done. So good on you people out there. We'll see you next week, 2100 GMT. Same time for you guys in the UK now. Cheers, everybody. Bye-bye for now.